He's not at war because of NATO. He's at war because he is a dictator who's been in power for 25 years. He's afraid of his own people rising up against him. And he does what many dictators do if they're afraid of their own people, which is he finds a foreign enemy and he starts a war. That's why he's in Ukraine.
Presidents Trump and Putin are due to be speaking around now about the future of Ukraine, as the Trump administration is reportedly considering recognizing Crimea as Russian in an attempt to get Putin to sign up to a ceasefire deal. Apparently, the division of Ukraine's assets has already been discussed with Kyiv, but how much will it have to give way in order to appease the Russian leader? Bill Browder is a high-profile Kremlin critic, a dangerous occupation for many, and author of Red Notice, How I Became Putin's #1 Enemy. Bill, thanks very much for joining us.
Great to be here.
What do you think President Putin will be going into this phone call wanting?
Well, President Putin, from the very beginning of this whole war, has never altered his opinion of what he wanted. He wants everything. He wants Zelensky to leave office. He wants Ukrainians to disarm. He wants all the land, not just the land that they've militarily taken over, but a whole bunch more in the 4 regions of Russia that Russia declared to be their own. He wants the U.S. and the Western allies to pull out of Eastern Europe. He's got a very long list of things that he wants. And he hasn't once since the war started in any way reduced his list, shown any ability to compromise. He has no negotiating position other than everything, and that's what I think is going to be very problematic about today's phone call.
And people always say if you want to understand what President Putin is thinking, listen to him. We do know before he launched the invasion of Ukraine, he wrote an essay about the history of Russia as he sees it and its imperial claims. Will he ever be satisfied with a portion of Ukrainian territory when he seems to want the whole country?
He won't be satisfied with anything. And in fact, I don't think he'd even be satisfied if he got the whole country. So the reason why Putin is at war is not because he needs Ukraine. If you look at a map of Russia, it's an enormous, enormous country. Ukraine doesn't actually even add that much. He's not at war because of NATO. He's at war because he is a dictator who's been in power for 25 years. He's afraid of his own people rising up against him. And he does what many dictators do if they're afraid of their own people, which is he finds a foreign enemy and he starts a war. That's why he's in Ukraine. And therefore, there's nothing that we can give him. There's nothing Ukraine can give him, nothing that Donald Trump can give him that will satisfy him, because this is all about him staying in power because he's afraid of his own people. And by the way, if he doesn't stay in power, he goes to jail, loses his money, and dies. And so he's pretty desperate to keep this whole thing going. And it seems to be very unlikely to me that there would be any scenario in which he would say, okay, war is over.
As somebody who's watched Putin very closely for years and sort of understood the tactics he uses, how much of a foil do you think Donald Trump is? Will he be able to hold his own in these negotiations? How much power does he actually have to make life difficult for Russia at the moment?
Well, Donald Trump is the most powerful man in the free world. He can do anything he wants to cause unbelievable pain for Vladimir Putin. If he wanted to, he could triple down on military aid for Ukraine. He could basically cut off the sale of oil from Russia, which would paralyze them economically. There's a lot of things he could do, but he doesn't seem to be interested in doing any of this stuff. He seems to be more interested in trying to force Ukraine to surrender. And in doing so, he can then sort of wash his hands of this thing and move on to other issues. That's the I mean, as you said, let's. It's not just Putin who's like this. If you want to know what Donald Trump is going to do, just listen to what he says and what and all the body language. It's all pretty straightforward as far as I'm concerned.
What do you make of the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin? You know, we did have that extraordinary moment where Donald Trump talked about how close they'd become in his last administration.
It's something which is pretty hard to get your head around, that Donald Trump seems to favor Vladimir Putin, who is the aggressor, and he seems to be chastising Vladimir Zelensky, who's the victim. And that for anybody who's been involved in this war or supporting the Ukrainians is pretty hard to understand. And it doesn't make any sense. And it's also not a very American position. If you ask the American people, what do you think of Vladimir Putin? More than 90% of them think he's a bad guy. If you ask people in the Republican administration, or actually the Republican Senate or House of Representatives, what do you think of Putin? They think he's a bad guy. And so this friendship and this admiration that Trump has for Putin doesn't really make any sense from the outside.
Well, we'll find out later today how that phone call does play out. But thanks very much for joining us, Bill Browder, Kremlin critic and author of Red Notice, How I Became Putin's #1 Enemy.
We'll get straight to it in this hour of the programme because Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin's phone call is supposed to be ending as we speak to you now. The Kremlin is reportedly demanding a suspension of all weapon deliveries to Ukraine during and after the ceasefire, or at least an end to American help. Trump could recognise the Crimea Peninsula as not just Russian-held, but actually Russian territory in another concession. That is a potential red line for Kyiv. Let's talk now to Sir Roderick Lyne, who was the British ambassador to Moscow from 2000 to 2004, spanning the early years of Vladimir Putin's presidency. Very good afternoon from us, Sir Roderick. We're calling this a negotiation, but isn't there something rather farcical about that term if Putin is not prepared to make any concessions and he is in fact simply asking for things that he believes he's achieved as the aggressor?
Yes, I don't think it's become a negotiation yet. Trump has been pursuing a formula of bullying the victim, which is Ukraine, and trying to appease the aggressor, which is Putin. And Putin is clearly playing hard to get. Trump has kept upping the price that he's offering Putin. He seems to have told Putin he can keep Crimea, he can keep the Donbass, there won't be any NATO, there'll be no American backstop. He'll end the supply of American arms and finance. He'll hold summit meetings with Putin. He'll call off sanctions. He'll start trade up again. He'll carve up mineral resources, maybe even have Putin rejoin the G7 and force Ukraine to hold elections. And Putin is pocketing all of these very nice offers from Mr. Trump and then saying he wants more.
Yeah.
I don't call that a negotiation.
No, I don't think anybody would, in no uncertain terms. To your mind, and with your experience of the man, is Putin simply the kind of man who can never take compromise? Or actually, is there something about this situation which is made incredibly bizarre by Donald Trump, a man who doesn't like compromise, kind of bowing down to him?
Oh, I think Donald Trump knows about compromise because he's done endless real estate deals in New York and he didn't win all of them. In fact, he bankrupted numerous firms. And he's approaching this rather as a property deal and saying, well, let's divide up assets, he was saying yesterday. Putin, very much in the Russian tradition, will maintain an extremely tough position for a very long time, while trying to squeeze as many concessions as he can out of Trump, and before he even starts to make a decision as to whether or not he's going to buy into a ceasefire. It's not impossible that he will if he can get Trump to offer him enough. There are reasons on Putin's side why a ceasefire would be rather helpful. His economy is not doing very well. They've lost something like 750,000 people dead and wounded in Russia. You can see some benefits to Russia, particularly if Putin can emerge back into the world, lose his pariah status, and all the other stuff that Trump is offering. So it's not impossible that down the road, if Putin can push Trump high enough, he might stop and think, well, at least as a tactic for now, I'll buy into a ceasefire. But I don't think Putin is ever going to give up his objective of seizing control of Ukraine. He's tried and failed to do that 4 times. He'll come back again at some point in the future.
It is quite extraordinary that just in our conversation over the last 4 minutes or so, and in all of these enormous diplomatic conversations between America and Russia, the wants and needs and desires of Ukraine just aren't talked about. That's no criticism of my conversation with you at all, Sir Roderick. But can you quite believe that we are now in that position?
Well, we are where we are, but there is one critical thing for Ukraine that we should never forget. The Ukrainians are not going to give up their sovereignty. They're not going to give up their freedom. They will resist to the utmost to avoid giving up their freedom. And they're not going to buy into a ceasefire unless they feel that they have security. They have the ability to deter or repel a renewed Russian attack. And I think that's where the Europeans come in. I think that Keir Starmer, Macron, van der Leyen have done a fantastic job actually in pulling Europe together, separate from America, not in opposition to America, but ready with this large coalition of the willing to give support to Ukraine, not just possibly put peacekeepers in Ukraine, but keep giving them financial help, keep supplying weapons to Ukraine, and stand up to Russia and say to Russia, we are not going to let you get away with this.
So what do you think will happen after the phone call has finished and the world is told all of those things that we've talked about there? And it does seem unlikely that there would be a different scenario to discuss.
Well, this is very speculative and we'll know in a few minutes. I mean, up to now, Trump has kept making optimistic noises. I think it's unlikely that Putin is going to turn him down flat. I think Putin is going to play for more. I may turn out to be wrong, but I think Putin is looking to see how high a bid he can get out of Donald Trump before he decides whether or not actually to buy into a tactical ceasefire. So that's what would not surprise me. Trump saying, well, we're making progress, but we're not quite there yet. We need more talks. And Putin continued to take a pretty hard line, but not tell Trump, no, go away, I'm not interested.
What's it like dealing with Vladimir Putin face to face?
Well, he's a rather cold individual. He's very calculating. He's pretty sharp. He's quick on the draw. In his early days, he was very, very keen to get on with the West and to integrate Russia with the West, and he was very successful in doing that. That was a matter of calculation with him. But up to the year 2003, 2004, we went a long way in building relations with Russia. By 2003, the West's relations with Russia had reached a level and a depth and a range that they had never at any point in history reached. He's now turned the clock back because there is this other side to Putin that is the paranoid ex-KGB officer, instinctively hostile to the West, particularly to America, very mistrustful. Putin doesn't trust anybody. Stalin once said, I don't trust anyone, not even myself. And I think that's probably true of Putin as well. So there's very much two sides to the man, and you're conscious of that. There's another aspect of Putin. He gets very emotional. He isn't emotional all the time. A lot of the time, he seems very cold. But some issues really get under his skin. Chechnya was one of them. Domestic opponents, Mikhail Hodorkovsky in particular, he got under Putin's skin, so he was locked up for 10 years and his oil company was stolen. And Putin has deep emotions about recapturing Ukraine, not occupying it, but just having it under Russian control.
Is he a well man at the moment?
Well, I haven't seen him for about 15 years. When you look at the television, he doesn't look ill. He seems quite alert, quite competent, pretty sharp. There are all sorts of rumors about his health, but nothing is substantiated, and he will be getting the best treatment if he has got problems that money can buy. And the guy's only a mere 72 years old. He's kept pretty fit. He doesn't drink heavily. He doesn't smoke. He takes a lot of exercise. We have no reason to think that he's going to fall over tomorrow.
Right. And when President Trump says that they have a great relationship, I mean, how great a relationship do they have?
I think Putin is very skilled at manipulating people, and I think he sees in Trump somebody with a gigantic ego and also tremendous avarice, who he can, with all his KGB skills, work on. And over the years, the Russians have bailed out Trump many, many times when Trump has defaulted on the banks and the banks would no longer lend him money. The Russians came in with it. I think Putin knows Trump's weaknesses, I think he can play on them, flatter him, and manipulate him.
Well, what times we live in. It's really interesting to talk to you. That's Sir Roderick Lyne, who was the British ambassador to Moscow from 2000 to 2004, a man who knows Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, well, Kamala Harris, remember her?
Yeah.
She said that Putin would eat Trump for lunch, and maybe he's having a full banquet. You never know.
It is quite a meeting, isn't it?
Not necessarily a meeting of minds, necessarily, but certainly a meeting. And whether we really ever find out the truth of what's gone on between them, I don't know.